When we think about an organization, we usually picture a building, an organizational chart, or a group of people. But what if an organization isn't a thing at all? What if it's something that's constantly created and recreated through our communication? Well, that, my friends, is the whole idea behind the communicative constitution of organizations, also known as CCO. Welcome back to Communication Campus. I'm your host, Dr. Malynnda Stewart. And in today's episode, we are unpacking the communicative constitution of organizations, a theory that flips the way we think about what organizations are. And instead of seeing communication as something that happens inside of organizations, the CCO perspective argues that communication is what creates them. Now, in true form, we're going to start with some assumptions that this theory has. First, have to think about the fact that organizations don't exist independently of communication. They can't. Organizations wouldn't occur without communication. Communication doesn't just transform information and transmit information, it constitutes the meaning and the structure. And when people interact, they create rules, roles, identities, even boundaries. So instead of seeing communication as a tool for management, the CCO approach sees communication as the foundation for organizational life. Now, much of the CCO framework comes from the Montreal School, led by scholars such as James Taylor, François Cooren, and Robert McPhee. Each argue that communication creates organizations through what they call text and the conversation cycle. Text is the formal, durable record of communication. So the policies, the mission statements, the emails, and the documents. The conversation is the informal, the everyday talk that brings those texts to life. Now, conversations generate texts, and texts shape future conversations. Together, this cycle stabilizes the organization while also allowing it to evolve. Now, another framework within the CCO approach comes from Robert McPhee and colleagues who identify four key flows of communication that together constitute the organization. First, we have membership negotiation. Who belongs to the organization and how do people join or leave? So, for example, we think about the hiring, onboarding, and socialization processes. Next, we have self-structuring, how roles, rules, and hierarchies are established. So think along the lines of creating job descriptions and defining who reports to whom. Next, we have activity coordination, how people communicate to get the work done. This can be emails, meetings, collaboration on shared projects. Next, we have institutional positioning, how the organization presents itself to external audiences. So we're thinking marketing, PR, partnerships, and community engagement. These flows interact, shaping and reshaping the organization every day through communication. So why does this matter? Well, this perspective gives us powerful lenses for analyzing modern organizations, especially in the digital world where communication is the organization. This helps us to think about and explain how remote and hybrid workspaces can still function as a cohesive organization, and why language and policy and narrative shape organizational identity. This also helps explain how power and meaning emerge through everyday talk. Now, to sum it up, communication doesn't just happen in organizations, it creates them. The texts and the conversations stabilize and sustain structures. McPhee's 4 flows show how the ongoing processes occur that define organizational life. I gotta say, this is probably one of my favorite to explore when I'm analyzing and looking at how I can best help an organization. I like looking at these flows. I like looking at the text and the way that we communicate within an organization. I also really love the cultural aspect and how this and the cultural communication play in a role. All right. Well, thank you for joining me yet again. And in our next session, we will explore how communication shapes leadership, collaboration, and change. Until then, remember, organizations aren't built out of brick and budgets. They're built out of communication. So therefore, please keep communicating.